So what are you up to today, sorry?
I'm praying.
You're praying?
May I ask what is the nature of it?
You're under arrest on suspicion of failing to comply with the Public Spaces Protection Order, which is
You are, a professional activist.
For being accused of causing people harassment, there has to be some sort of perceptible measure of what that is.
Now, some of those babies here because of your presence.
Dozens and dozens and dozens of women that I know.
The Vice President of the United States name-checked you.
The British government charged Adam Smith Connor with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes.
I don't believe that Britain should have thought crime zones. I think that's a very dangerous thing to do.
Are you seriously saying that you chose this park just because it's part of your life?
Why not there? This narrative has been used to curtail free speech.
Hello and welcome back to UnHerd. The state of free speech here in the UK is suddenly internationally interesting. The Vice President JD Vance shocked all of Europe at the Munich Security Conference when he said that he thought free speech is in retreat here, and he quoted examples of particular cases that he found egregious. The US State Department is also getting involved, making statements about basically how they condemn what they think are restrictions on free speech here in the UK. The Times runs headlines like "No free trade without free speech" as a major geopolitical tension. So what's the truth of it? Here at UnHerd, we have been actively campaigning to expose shadowy organizations like the GDI, the Global Disinformation Index. We've been fighting against big tech, censorship, any attempt to shut down debate. And yet, I confess that when I hear the version of British life that is described on X, on Twitter, or passed around between officials in the Trump administration, basically the idea that we are emptying the jails of paedophiles to fill them with people who are tweeting wrongthink, it's not quite true either. The most often quoted, and to my mind the most interesting cases, involve people praying outside or protesting outside or in the vicinity of abortion clinics. These are the examples that get talked about the most, and it's one of those that JD Vance talked about at Munich. It's also where the State Department is getting involved. But what's the truth of them? Today, we have gathered 3 of the most famous, most talked about individuals who have become free speech cases. They've all been talked about by the American government or by this government. They are real talking points, and each of them involve standing outside or near abortion clinics. We want to try and get a bit nuanced here and find out, are they just innocent civilians or passers-by being outrageously arrested for thought crime, or are they professional campaigners deliberately trying to test the boundaries of the law and deploying quite interesting and clever tactics to do so? Their names are Isabel Vaughan-Spruce, Livia Tossici-Bolt, and Adam Smith Connor. Quite a mouthful. Each of them we are going to talk to, kick the tires a bit, I'll push back a bit, and I want you to decide by the end how convincing you find them and just how outrageous their treatment really was. Isabel Vaughan-Spruce has been arrested multiple times for silently praying outside abortion clinics or in the vicinity of abortion clinics. Some of those cases she has been successful in challenging, and she joins us today to tell us a bit more. Welcome, Isabel.
Hello, Freddie, and thanks for having me on.
Give us the kind of long-term history. You are a lifelong campaigner against abortion. Is that how you would describe yourself?
I've been going outside abortion centres for, around 20 years now. And in the past, I would have been going there to offer help and alternatives to women who wanted to consider that. And many, many, many women did accept those offers of help, whether it might be financial help, accommodation, babysitting, whatever they might need to continue a pregnancy that they wanted, but maybe just felt unable to in their present situation. But in 2022, a PSPO, Public Space Protection Order, created a buffer zone around the abortion centre that I was praying and offering help outside in Birmingham. So my volunteers, I have a group of volunteers who like me would go and offer help and support outside the abortion centre in the past. And just to maybe paint a little picture of that, they didn't have any signs or posters. They would just come in a group of maybe 2 or 3, not a big crowd of people, and would just be there with a leaflet of help to offer to anyone who wanted it with, maybe saying something something like, is there any help we can offer you, or would you like a leaflet? And obviously if somebody didn't respond or said no, then that would be the end of the conversation. But my volunteers moved outside the buffer zone when it came into place in 2022 in Birmingham. But I looked at the terms of the PSPO.
So the buffer zone, just to be clear, is around 150 metres. That's the law now, isn't it?
So just to make clear, what I'm talking about is the PSPO, not the national buffer zone. So actually the PSPO has slightly different boundaries to the national buffer zone, which is quite confusing because now we've actually got two different buffer zones outside our abortion centre. But yeah, it would have been a similar sort of size to that, yes. So my volunteers went outside that buffer zone and continued praying down the road. And I looked at the terms of the PSPO, and it was banning forms of protest, and I reasoned, well, I don't protest outside abortion centres, so certainly my silent prayers would still be allowed in that vicinity. So I actually went inside the buffer zone and a distance away from the abortion centre, just stood there silently praying in my head. Obviously that wasn't sort of manifest in any way, even if prayer can be manifest. I wasn't like in a traditional prayer pose or holding rosary beads or a Bible or anything. I was just simply praying in my head. Police officers
this
came.
was inside the buffer zone now?
That was inside the buffer zone, yes.
How close to the clinics?
Sort of, metres away from where an entrance to the gateway would have been. So the police arrived and asked what I was doing, and I told them, I'm just physically standing here, but in my head I might be saying some prayers. That was enough for them to arrest me. I was placed in a cell for quite a while before being interviewed under caution as to what I'd been praying about. And I was actually charged with engaging in an act which was intimidating service users. And actually, the abortion centre was closed when I was there, so there were no service users.
On that particular occasion, it was closed, but you have been there.
On all those occasions, up to that point when I was charged, I had never been in there when it was actually open. So on that charge, it was only for when I'd been there when it has been closed.
The charges were then dropped in 2022, is that right?
I had to go to court. So the CPS actually said that they didn't think maybe this case was worth continuing, but that's not the same as me being found innocent. So I still had this charge, hanging over me that they could have brought at any time. So I decided it was best to continue the process they had started and go to court. I was acquitted within minutes and found completely innocent. So I reasoned, okay, people do recognise I am allowed to silently pray there. So 2 or 3 weeks later, I went and stood on exactly the same spot and did, if you can say that, exactly the same thing. I just silently prayed in my head. This time, 6 police officers arrived.
Was the clinic open or closed on this occasion?
It was actually open on that occasion, yes. And just to make it clear, I wasn't engaging in any way with anyone or had any intention of engaging with anyone. No conversations at all, no leaflets on me. The police actually said to me on that occasion that my prayers were an offence. I reminded them that they were just silent prayers in my head, and they said that didn't matter. My prayers are an offence, and they arrested me and took me away in a police van. And again, I was in a cell for a while before being released and put on bail. After 6 months, they told me that no charges were being taken against me, but they still continued to come out after that when I was inside the buffer zone and give me various tickets telling me that I was going to be fined. So in the end, I made a claim against the police for wrongful arrest, false imprisonment and assault. And I was awarded an out-of-court settlement for £13,000. And I hoped that was the end of it.
You have been continuing to go back to stand outside these clinics.
My general way is to generally go approximately once a week, which is, like I say, what I've been doing for about 20 years. Each week, the police turn up again. And it's been very confusing, particularly since the national buffer zones were passed last year. The police continue to tell me different things each week as to why I shouldn't be there.
And you're still going? I mean, did you go last week?
I've been this week. Last week I was actually away, but I went this week. I went 2 weeks previously.
And any police interactions?
The police continue to come out. So pretty much every week the police are coming out. 1 week I was told that just knowing who I am is causing people harassment. Now, I find that very concerning because harassment is forbidden anywhere, not just outside an abortion centre. If just knowing who I am means I'm harassing people, then there's simply nowhere left in the country that I'm allowed to go. That's how ludicrous it is.
I'd be keen to just sort of get a bit of the backstory. So Because some people will hear this and not be sure, is it your job? Is it a protest? Is it your kind of a matter of kind of personal conscience? It doesn't impugn your integrity in any way, but it is worth saying you are, a professional activist in that sense. You actually work for an organisation, UK March for Life, which is devoted to this cause.
Yeah, so for the last couple of years, I've started working, before that it was more of a voluntary capacity, but in the last couple of years, it is my paid job. I run March for Life UK. So the work I do with that is different, but it's on a similar line, you could say, as in it's to do with abortion.
Really, your endeavours are to sort of test the boundaries in a way of these legislations. Would that be fair? You want to see how far it can go on the free speech argument and how far that will take you. And at the moment, it's a bit unclear, really, how the
So
state
just to be clear,
deals.
this is what I've been doing for 20 years, long before buffer zones were ever thought up, as far as I'm aware. So this isn't something, just some sort of reaction to a buffer zone being brought in. Like I say, for 20 years, pretty much every week, I've been going outside abortion centres, often when it was open to talk to women, but sometimes depending on my working hours in the past, it would sometimes be in an evening when an abortion centre was closed, sometimes when there was nobody there around just to pray. It's something I very strongly believe as a Christian. So no, not just because buffer zones have come in. This is something that I've believed, all my life, and I've been practicing for, like I say, around 20 years.
So I guess where people will be uncertain or be making up their minds is what is the appropriate set of rules? Because I think most people, I'm pretty sure the overwhelming majority of people would defend your right to protest in Parliament Square or in some kind of public space. I suppose, let me just ask you that question, we should not be allowed to protest inside a hospital. Would you agree
just to
with
be
that?
clear, I have engaged in the past in protests near Parliament for various causes. But what I'm doing is not a protest outside an abortion centre. In fact, I've never protested outside an abortion centre. I'm simply silently saying some prayers in my head. That's not a protest. I've made that clear to police when they've spoken to me, that I'm not protesting and I have no intention of protesting outside an abortion centre. So that isn't something I do. Whether it's right or whether it's wrong, it's not what I do. And it's not what I've ever done outside an abortion centre. I'm simply there to silently pray. And to those going past, they wouldn't even know that I'm praying. I'm just simply standing there. And like I say, not even in a traditional prayer pose, not that I'm saying somebody shouldn't be able to do that. To people going past, they might see me looking at my phone sometimes. I'll be standing with my hands in my pockets. I'm simply standing on a public street. That's how innocuous it is.
So what do you say to people who make the argument that for the women going in and out of these clinics, who are obviously most likely it's a very distressing, difficult period, maybe it's a hard decision for them, it's a very personal one, they would find it intimidating and may not be an active protest. You're not shouting at them or saying, don't do this, but it's visibly clear that you're there because you believe that what they're doing is wrong. And it makes that very personal experience difficult and it's unsettling, and it's in some way an encroachment on their rights to go through that procedure, whether you think it's right or wrong. How do you resist or respond to that argument?
Well, firstly, I would say that somebody going into the abortion centre hasn't got any knowledge of what I'm doing or why I'm there. So it's not that somebody walking past would say, oh, why is she standing there? People often stand outside the abortion centre. So there's women who stand outside the abortion centre, maybe having a smoke before they go in, or even just to think about what they're going to do. There's often boyfriends waiting outside, women coming out waiting for a taxi. It's a busy area. People will be passing to and fro all the time. So to see somebody standing on a street isn't an unusual thing. And women going into that abortion centre wouldn't have any reason to know what I'm doing or why I'm doing it there.
So you're actually disguising your prayer. You're trying not to look like you're praying.
I would say that prayer isn't something that's necessarily outward. Sometimes we might do bodily gestures to try and help ourselves get into a certain way of thinking. So sometimes we might kneel down to try and, help us feel more humble before God or something like that. But we don't have to do those things. I sometimes pray when I'm driving my car. My bodily posture doesn't change. I don't close my eyes, thankfully. I don't put my hands together. I will still be looking outwardly exactly the same. So you don't have to change your bodily posture to pray. Sometimes we do, as I say, to try and help our inward thoughts. But you don't have to do that. And when I'm outside an abortion centre, I don't do that.
If you were if you were standing with your hands clasped, let's say, would you still think that was not a protest? Should we defend the rights of people to pray visibly outside abortion centres, do you think?
I think somebody should be allowed to do that, because depending on their reasons for being there, that's certainly not necessarily a protest. But as I say, that's not what I'm doing. But I do think there has to be some sort of measurable level of what a protest is, and certainly what harassment is. It's what I've been accused of. I've been accused of causing people harassment. There has to be some sort of perceptible measure of what that is. And it can't be simply somebody standing silently on a street, or you could literally walk down a street and handpick people and say, I just think they're protesting.
Let me throw a counterexample at you, Isabel, because I'm trying to think through these case studies. So if, for example, there were Muslim groups who were very upset about teachings in a kindergarten or in a school, maybe they felt the Prophet was being defamed. That's something we have real life experience of. And they chose to stand outside the entrance to a school, whether or not they were visibly praying or not, but because they felt that things that they didn't like were taking place inside that school. Would you defend their right to do that?
Firstly, you're saying they. And just remember, I'm there completely by myself. There's not a big group of us standing kind of blocking the path or anything like that. If one person, one Muslim, wanted to stand outside a school and silently say some prayers, I don't see why there would be a problem with that. If it's a public street, any member of the public should be allowed on that street. And I don't think we can ban prayer if it's inside somebody's head. I mean, I just think that sounds farcical. And to be honest, whatever religion anyone has, whether it's the same religion as me or different beliefs, people should be allowed to pray inside their heads to whatever God they might believe in, even if I don't believe that that's true. So I think anybody, if people are allowed to stand on a street, and I believe public streets are allowed to be stood on, then that should hold everywhere and anywhere.
Has anyone over the years made the argument to you, this might seem very abstruse, that you're not actually allowed to stand stationary on a pavement? I thought public thoroughfares one had to be mobile on, and if you're standing or camping or remaining stationary on them, that was actually not allowed. Has anyone made that case?
You would see on that street that happening throughout the day. As I say, often people will be waiting there for taxis. People will be stopping to talk before they go into the abortion centre. You see that all the time. If police are going to clamp down on people being motionless on a street, or, walking within a few metres back and forth occasionally, or whatever they might be doing, and unless you're actually heading at a certain pace down the street, then they would be stopping to talk to people throughout the day, literally throughout the day, certainly on that street. So, you will see that happening for various reasons, certainly in that area, and I do see that happening all the time.
Your case has even got attention from the US. The House Judiciary Committee apparently met your lawyers when they were in London. There is a sense that this new Trump administration is taking a particular interest in these examples of apparent incursions into free speech here in the UK. Do you welcome the American interest?
I welcome anyone who's interested in free speech, to be honest, and our freedom, in my case, to be able to think what I want, because it's not even about speech. I don't even speak to people or have any intention of speaking to people. So any friend who wants to speak out about that, I welcome it. And I certainly welcomed it from our friends in America. The average person that I speak to on the streets does seem to recognise that we're actually getting into a concerning situation here in the UK. And I think it's just sad that it's maybe not being taken up enough in Parliament by politicians and those who have, more authority. But I do see it when I'm talking to the average people, the amount of people who've contacted me and said things like, I don't share your religious beliefs, or I don't share your pro-life views, but I do have concerns about whether it's freedom of speech or, like I say, even your freedom to think, and have been very supportive of that. And like I said, that just seems to be the average people here on the street that I'm hearing that from in the UK. So I do think that there's serious problems here, and I think the general public are beginning to wake up to that. Sadly, it's often not the case until it affects us personally that we'll do something about it or speak out about it. But I think people are realising if that particular person, just because of either who they are or what they think, is going to be censored, then, could that ever have implications for me if I fall foul of what the popular opinion is or what the current ideology is, and I think they're right to be concerned.
I just want to get your sense of what the parameters should be. So you think people should be allowed to pray outside clinics. They should be allowed to visibly pray, in your opinion. Should they be allowed to hold up a placard of some kind, which is more obviously a protest, do you think?
To be honest, with all the groups that I know that have gone outside the abortion centres, I would certainly say the vast majority, if not all of them that I'm aware of, are there to offer help. So we want to be approachable. In the past, I'm talking about prior to buffer zones, they wanted to be approachable, and they were. The amount of women I know, dozens and dozens and dozens of women who would have approached us. Sometimes people would have had a poster that said something like pregnant, need help, or something like that, to kind of show to somebody why they were there and that they could be approached. So a poster like that, I have no reason to think why that can't be there. And as I say, I think, when we recognise how many women would have approached us and really welcomed that help, especially when we know how many women are feeling quite coerced with regards to abortion, and even polls from the BBC have shown that, I think it is really important that there are people there who can offer that help. And I think it's really sad that there's many women now who are going to be going into abortion centres who won't have that offer of help now, because there's not any people outside them offering that help, which they would have had in the past. I've had the blessing to meet many of those babies that have been born, and those women were very, very glad that they made those decisions to continue the pregnancy, which is what they wanted. They just didn't know how to get that help.
And are some of those babies here because of your presence outside that clinic, do you think? I mean, can you point to concrete examples where women have taken a different course because they ran into you or one of the people you work with?
Dozens and dozens and dozens of women that I know have continued their pregnancy, either that I have met personally or that my team have met. And they have, written letters. Some of them have even created a video. A lot of them maybe don't want to go public on that, and that's quite understandable. Maybe they quite regret even considering abortion, but some of them have been very vocal about it. And, I would certainly say well over 100 women, probably a lot more than that I can think of.
Isabel Vaughan-Spruce, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Adam Smith-Connor, JD Vance, the Vice President of the United States, name-checked you and, in fact, elaborated on your case at some length at the Munich Security Conference in a way that shocked Europe and seems to have had quite serious consequences in terms of our relationship with the US. So let's just have a quick listen to what the Vice President said.
A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith-Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. And after British law enforcement spotted him and demanded to know what he was praying for, Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution.
First of all, is his description of your case accurate? That you were standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic, silently praying for 3 minutes, not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on your own?
I was on the other side of the road from the clinic. There's a row of trees. I was stood on the other side of the row of the tree. So I was obscured from view from the clinic, and I prayed silently for about 3 or 4 minutes. When I was approached by 2 community support officers who asked me what I was doing. I said I was praying, and remarkably, one of the officers then said, "Can I ask the nature of your prayer?" Literally probing into my mind to determine whether my thoughts were allowable or not in that area. And my answer to that question, that I was praying for my son Jacob, who they knew to have died in an abortion, I said, well, that's literally thought crime. You're asking me to move for a literal thought crime. And we don't have thought crimes in Britain. Then resulted in them sending a fixed penalty. I thought they'd made a mistake. I thought it had been sent in error initially, but no, they doubled down on it and took me to court. and I ended up with a conviction, a 2-year conditional discharge, and £9,000 corpse charges. So essentially what he said was absolutely correct.
So was this the first time you had done this? Or are you a regular campaigner?
I became a Christian in 2018, November 2018. Soon after my conversion, I had quite a graphic dream. Afterwards, I record that I paid for an abortion some 18 years earlier, back in the year 2000, so 25 years ago. That got me looking into the abortion issue. So basically, I did some post-abortion counselling, and I looked into how I could sort of raise this issue of abortion and just help people who perhaps felt coerced into an abortion, who perhaps felt they had no other option but an abortion. So I started praying. The first place I went was Bournemouth, and I started praying with a group outside the Bournemouth abortion clinic, and that would have been at the beginning of 2019.
How many times would you say you've done that over the years?
I would probably go once or twice a week. Now, most of the time, I actually don't go to Bournemouth, but Bournemouth is a 40-minute drive from me. In Southampton, it's a 20-minute drive to the Southampton clinic.
Were the community support officers familiar with you? Had they seen you before?
No, they didn't know me. And actually in the trial, it came out that they didn't know who I was. I wasn't recognised.
Just to understand exactly what happened on that day, I guess it seems incredibly efficient, weirdly efficient of two community support officers in a 3-minute window to go and find a man behind trees. Whatever you think of the rights and wrongs of it, it seems implausibly competent of them.
When this buffer zone was introduced, I wrote to the council. I expressed my concerns that the way the buffer zone is written, it gives the impression that praying in that area or doing the sign of the cross or sprinkling holy water or distributing information could be considered a crime. And I was concerned, well, that means if you held a Remembrance Day service where you sing the national anthem, where you do the 2-minute silence, or having a Christmas carol service, and this is a common area, it's agreed, it's agreed. So these are the sorts of things that could go on that area, that these things could be considered criminal acts. The council replied and said, no, this is just purely directed at stopping any activity that's in favour of or against abortion. I said, well, okay, then, so a Remembrance Day service is permitted then? And they said, yes, I'm a veteran and I've lost friends in war. So I had a Remembrance Day service there, and we prayed for a friend of mine, Rick, who died in Afghanistan, as well as others. And the police attended. The police saw the whole thing. It wasn't an issue, wasn't any problem with it whatsoever.
Would you say you're trying to test the boundaries of these laws then? I mean, in these different ways, you're probing what can and can't be allowed. And that's almost a process you're quite deliberately going through.
I've been praying outside of Bournemouth and Southampton abortion clinics for a number of years. I wasn't doing anything different to what I normally do. So I wouldn't say I was testing the boundaries. I would say I was practicing my faith as I'd always done.
So do you dispute, just at core principle, the idea of having exclusion zones or buffer zones around clinics? Or
no,
you don't? Or
I don't.
Tell me more.
I have no problem with laws that prevent harassment and intimidation. So in that sense, no, if you have a zone that makes it clear you can't harass or intimidate people, fine. That's good. I would argue that we already have those laws, and I certainly have never seen pro-lifers harassing or intimidating people. But if you want to make that absolutely clear, then by all means have that zone.
But do you accept that it might feel intimidating to have someone visibly praying outside your clinic? I mean, that's the core of the argument, isn't it? It's not violent, it's not aggressive, but to someone going through that very personal experience, to have someone, as you approach your clinic, making some kind of publicly demonstrable comment on your action is intimidating.
Many women have accepted help from pro-lifers. When this buffer zone was introduced, they actually did a survey of people in the local vicinity, and they asked, have you experienced any harassment, intimidation in this area? Not one single person replied to say that they had. They also did a street corner survey where they physically were there, and they asked people, have you experienced harassment, intimidation in this area? Again, not one single person reported experience any harassment or intimidation. The other point you mentioned about just someone's mere presence there could be considered harassment, intimidation. So I denied that because there's actually no evidence of that. I couldn't be seen directly from the clinic because I was behind a tree. From the entrance of the clinic, I was obscured from view. If you had seen me, you would have simply thought I was waiting for a taxi.
I've got to sound a bit of a skeptical note there, because if what you're saying is completely true, that you just looked like a guy waiting for a taxi, why did community support officers approach you? They would have to be very brilliant to accidentally get right that you were actually an anti-abortion campaigner.
To go back to the story, so on the 11th of the 11th at 11 o'clock, we held a Remembrance Day service, no issues, praying, 2-minute silence, singing the national anthem. After that service, the council wrote to me. They kept on writing me, reminding me of the terms of the zone. So I would reply to them, and I the next week I replied and I said, look, I'm going to be going back to pray for my son, Jacob, who died of an abortion. I'll be very careful. I will not face the clinic. I will respect people's privacy. So privacy was a big part of this. I will have my back to the clinic. I won't approach anyone. I won't look at anyone. I will simply pray silently for my son. And that's what I did. I went there. I was approached after an hour or so. Somebody asked me what I was doing from the clinic. Anyway, the police were called. The police came, and the police confirmed that what I was doing was right. There are actual words where this is England. You can do that.
Just to dig into this, because this is something I'm a bit confused about. You've told us that part of the reason for you being there, or part of this movement, is that you can talk to and help women who are going through this process, or that's happened in the past. And yet you've also got this point that you raised about the abortion that you paid for some 18 years ago, was it?
Well, it's 25 years ago now. It was back in the year 2000. Yeah.
So, why would you, if you're praying for that, why would you need to do that in that location? Could you not pray for Jacob at home or in a church, or why need to do that outside of that particular abortion clinic?
I think we all accept that places can have significance to people. No one would question me praying for Rick, who died in Afghanistan, by a war memorial.
So was that the actual abortion clinic that your partner went to?
No, it wasn't. That was up in Leeds. I live in the south in the New Forest. For practical reasons, I can't get in my car and drive 4 or 5 hours up to Leeds. So I choose to go to a more local location.
I think even well-meaning people listening to this, even people, dare I say it, who agree with you on the point of abortion, might be scratching their chins a little bit about the sort of elaborate nature of the rationale here. You feel very strongly about this issue. You have been praying outside and being present outside multiple abortion clinics for a number of years since you converted. And that's what you're still doing. Would a skeptic not be right to just say what he's doing here is trying to test the law, trying to find a kind of grey area, the maximum he's allowed to do, and give this alternative reasoning for it, basically to try and make it sound like a free speech outrage and make people like JD Vance pick up the cause, which seems to have worked? What would you say to those kind of skeptics?
I don't believe that Britain should have thought crime zones. I think that's a very dangerous thing to do. Now we have buffer zones covering, someone's calculated they're 300 meters diameter. Now they now cover 25 kilometers squared of England's green and pleasant land, where if my conviction stands, we have 25 kilometers squared of thought crime zones. If I can stand and pray and do the 2-minute silence in the exact same location 2 weeks prior and pray for my friend Rick, who died in Afghanistan, and then if I go back and I pray for my son Jacob, somehow my praying for Rick is not a crime, but my praying for Jacob is a crime. If that's not the definition of thought crime, I really don't know what is.
If you are a patient, I suppose they would be called, of these clinics, and you're walking up to them, if you see people doing a Remembrance Day service, it's clearly not relevant to you, and you don't feel in any way intimidated, or that any people you don't know are having strong opinions about your sort of very difficult day, whilst if you are more likely to be an anti-abortion campaigner, that would have a different effect on those people. Like, is there not a distinction there? Just quite a simple one.
There absolutely is. So it is not unusual in that location for people to be milling around, for partners, for husbands, to be waiting outside whilst their partners are inside. So the fact that I'm a man there, milling around, it is really not unusual in that location.
Adam, thank you so much for your time and talking us through your case today.
Thank you very much.
Livia Tossici-Bolt is a 64-year-old retired clinical scientist from Bournemouth, except she was convicted for breaching a PSPO, a Public Spaces Protection Order, outside an abortion clinic for standing there with a sign saying, "Here to talk if you want." She is going to have to pay up to £20,000 of costs for that case, and the sentence has been suspended. Livia, welcome to UnHerd.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Were you surprised that you lost that case?
Well, yes, I was. I was with my sign, "Here to talk if you want," I believe without breaching any of the terms of the PSPO. In fact, I was inside the PSPO zone, yes. With my sign, I was convinced I was not going to break any of the rules, nor was my intention to break any law.
So because your sign says, "Here to talk if you want," your argument is that that's not a protest. Your sign doesn't say, "Abortion is bad, don't do it." You are offering a conversation. That's your case, isn't it? So that it shouldn't be thought of as a protest. It's an invitation to a conversation.
Yes, and an invitation directed to anyone. In fact, I was there for the community, to talk to the community. And of course, there was a possibility that people approaching me would be clients as well. I was open to everyone.
So how close to the entrance of the clinic were you standing?
I'm not very good with distances in meters, but it's on the other side, of the opposite side of the road, in front of the clinic, there is a green area. And I was in a corner of this green area, not directly in front of the entrance.
So why did you choose that spot? It's interesting because you broke the terms of the PSPO by being too close, but you chose not to go actually to the entrance. Why was that?
I've been there many times on that area, on that greens. I was there to connect with the community. It's a spot that is part of my life, if you want.
Hold on a sec. So here I'm going to sound a bit skeptical. Are you seriously saying that you chose this park just because it's part of your life, not because it's across the road from an abortion clinic, and you were open to any types of conversation, not specifically pro-life themed conversations? Are you actually saying that? Because I think a lot of people listening will think there's a lot of parks in Bournemouth. You don't have to choose the one outside the abortion clinic. And
why not there? Why not there? I spent many times, many days of my life there, and I wanted to continue to be there. And in fact, it was important for me to connect with two particular vulnerable people I was worried about due to the loneliness of the lockdowns. And I managed to speak to them. And I was very pleased with that. And then, of course, I'm forbidden, so I don't know what I can do in that area. So I don't want to break my conditional sentence, whatever it is.
Well, it is a conviction, isn't it? You have been found guilty of breaching a PSPO.
So I convicted, and I don't know I don't want to break the law, but it seems absurd to me that I don't know what happened if I pass in that area, for example.
I mean, I've been to many parks over my life. I don't remember many people standing with a sign saying here to talk if you want. Do you think most people would have associated it with the clinic across the road and your history as a pro-life campaigner?
So they may not. People who knew me probably did associate. In fact, I had conversation about that. And people who didn't know me, absolutely not. And that was the beauty. And if you remember, people, they stood with signs in those days, free hugs, and many other initiatives of breaking up the isolation of the horrible pandemic times. But
this was March 2023, you were?
Yeah.
This was post-pandemic.
Yes, yeah. I couldn't have done it during the pandemic times.
I'm just going to read a quote here, if I may, from the judge. So, Orla Austin, you lacked insight that your presence would have a detrimental effect on the women attending the clinic, their associates, staff, and members of the public. Do you see the argument that it might be intimidating or disturbing for people going through that very personal and difficult moment?
Yeah, I hear this argument often enough. Too often, probably, and it's the argument that was put also in the verdict of the judicial review or the statutory review. If I thought that my actions would be detrimental to anyone, I would stop doing them. But I think conversation is very important, especially for women in a vulnerable state, in a confused state, an anxiety state, a turmoil state. I've been there. So to impede that, saying that it's detrimental, this is a corrosive narrative, a divisive narrative.
Are you hoping that women who are in that vulnerable state, i.e. people going into the clinic, will stop on their way and have a conversation with you?
On that day, I was not there to converse. I was open anyway. But in the past, I've experienced all that in the past, of course. And I've seen the change a conversation can make. You just have to listen to women. I mean, go to websites like Via for Me, for example, to see the testimony of women. I've been approached even by women, even now that I'm operating outside the buffer zone. I'm approached by women saying, I can see what you're doing. I wish you were there for me. I could have done with this. I could have done with this information. I could have done with this extra help. I could have done with counseling after abortion, because abortion is a trauma for women. And that's something that is not taught about. We have to talk. We have to talk more. There is a strong connection between freedom of speech and this right of women to hear information, to be informed, because information, I believe strongly about this, is empowering, and to prevent information is doing damage.
Just so I understand, do you support or oppose the idea of exclusion zones around clinics?
I fully oppose that.
Yes.
Yes.
And would that include protests?
Well, that's...
Do you think people should be allowed to protest?
Yeah. That's the narrative. The narrative sort of starts with harassment, intimidation, and now it progresses to detriment. So becoming more and more vague at each step. But again, it's a narrative that is stopping information getting to women. This morning, before talking to you, I was outside the buffer zone. Maybe if the society finds this detrimental, we should be given a nice room next to the abortion clinic where women can come inside and have a cup of tea and a conversation to see alternatives.
Let me put a counterexample to you, because I think it's interesting whether this is mainly about your Christian beliefs and about your belief that abortion is wrong, or whether it really is a free speech question. If there was a similarly complex and private procedure that you fully supported, let's say there's a lot of controversy around so-called conversion therapy at the moment, where the government is very keen to ban it, and that would be any talk of trying to persuade a homosexual that they could be become heterosexual, or where it becomes more controversial is trying to persuade a teenager who is having gender difficulties or believing that they are the opposite sex, that they could be quote unquote cured from that through talking therapy and becoming more at home in their own body. I would presume, correct me if I'm wrong, that you would support those people's right to go to that person and seek that therapy.
First of all, I would distinguish between teenagers and adults. For teenagers, this is a very, very toxic ideas that have been put in their minds. And that's another narrative, I'm sorry, that is coming up now, promoted by who, I don't know.
If there were trans activists offering conversation outside that clinic, saying, embrace your trans identity, don't be bullied into abandoning it, would you support that?
That's okay. That's free speech. Yeah, free speech in the society. And they support in both ways, trying to persuade to persuade in a way or in another. And for an adult, okay, that's free speech.
What about outside a hospital? Should people be able to hold placards?
Yeah. Inside the hospital, first of all, there should be informed consent and discussion.
Final question for you, Livia, because I'm trying to understand what the boundaries are. Do you think there should be any restrictions on people's rights to make clear their views, and even if it's not a full-blown protest, to approach strangers to try and engage with them on important issues? Or would you be an absolutist and say that that should always be allowed anywhere?
Yes, yeah. As long as it's respectful, harassment, intimidation are despicable and also punishable by law. And that is being used, its narrative has been used to curtail free speech. And then posing free speech against the interest of others, I think it's very sad where we are.
What is your next step? Will you be appealing this?
I'll have to think about this. I read the sentence maybe once. I'll have to read it more carefully. Meanwhile, I continue to exercise my freedom of speech where I can and when I can.
Final question for you. The United States State Department seems to have intervened in your case, which is a very unusual thing to happen. They've said, quote, "We are disappointed with the UK court's conviction of Livia Tossici-Bolt for violating a designated buffer zone at an abortion clinic. Freedom of expression must be protected for all." How do you feel about becoming a political talking point internationally? Do you support the American government getting involved in our internal political controversies?
I'm sort of grateful that maybe you need somebody from the outside the box to your situation to see what's happening. And I can see the problem of free speech not only in my case, but in many sections of the society.
Livia Tossici-Bolt, thank you so much for your time today.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for listening to me and talking to me.
So there you have it. 3 individuals, each of them Christian, I'm sure sincerely and passionately opposed to abortion, suddenly finding themselves caught up in a free speech argument and using various forms of testing the boundaries of what is and isn't allowed to raise awareness to their core cause, which is, of course, being anti-abortion. Really interesting, I thought, to hear their details. Thanks to all of them for joining today, and thanks to you for tuning in. This was UnHerd.